Hello. I've been taking a look at the Dave Chappelle furore at Netflix, and I got a transcript of his set so I could see what he actually said. And I also saw quite a few posts on Twitter from Jewish organisation or Jews or non-Jews who seemed a bit embarrassed by the whole thing, who were saying that Chappelle was being anti-Semitic. And then, of course, there were many giving him stick for being transphobic, whatever that means. What interested me was that outside Twitter, the whole focus of the mainstream media was the transgender aspect of it. Everyone concentrated on that. I haven't seen much at all about the anti-Semitism, which Chappelle undoubtedly did show. And that struck me as an instance of selective outrage. We're full of that now in the West, aren't we? Let's put it that way. I mean, the first joke he did, and I'm now referring to the Jews, or I'm going to get onto the transgender thing. The first joke he did, I thought it was quite funny. He talks about his idea for a movie. The setup is that a super advanced civilization back in history left planet Earth on spaceships, and then they came back to reclaim planet Earth. And he was going to call it Space Jews. I thought that was quite amusing, especially because in a way it made a comment about the stupidity of the Arabs. Let's face it, if some super advanced race came back, Jewish or not, from travelling the universe, and they were advanced enough to still have a viable civilization after thousands of years, then who wouldn't want to welcome them back? We could do with some help here for sure. So I thought that was fine and nothing to get heated about. I couldn't see what the Twitter storm was all about. But then he started coming back to the subject. It's like sort of like a puppy with a slipper. Then he started comparing Jews to 19th century American slave owners. That wasn't too nice. I think at that point he really, well, of course, he stepped over the mark. But then that's what comedians are supposed to do, isn't it? And although I thought he was voicing ideas I thought inappropriate, his right to voice them, so far as I am concerned, should be absolutely unassailable. But the other funny thing about that, or perhaps it's not so funny, is when he started to go for the transgender people, he was a lot more careful about the way he phrased things, even though he talked about how uncomfortable he would feel if he were standing, in a public lavatory, what restroom or whatever, standing at a urinal next to what appeared to be a woman, until she lifts her skirt to expose full male equipment. He had to preface that with, look, I don't say that transgender people should be attacked, and nobody should have to show a birth certificate to get into a restroom or a public lavatory, as we would call it over here. The point is, he was himself a lot more sensitive about causing offence. And that was because, as he put it right at the beginning, he said, women get mad at me, men get mad at me, lesbians get mad at me. I don't know why he seems to think lesbians are different from women, but that's Chappelle for you. Then he said, but those transgenders, they want me dead. So he already acknowledged that the sort of people who are either pushing for or participating in the transgender movement have more of a capacity for violence than those space Jews he kept talking about and comparing them to 19th century slave owners. That wasn't nice. And he thought possibly he could deflect them, that is the transgenders, by making nice noises before he went into making jokes about transgender people and washrooms. But whatever, he didn't call for violence, either when he took a pop at Jews or a pop at transgenders. Actually, he didn't really take a pop at transgenders either. He was talking more about his own feelings of discomfort in such a situation. So this fuss is even sillier than it started off sounding like, because what they're saying is that no one can even confess that they may feel awkward when a woman in a lavatory lifts up her skirt to reveal the full 9 yards. He has the absolute right to say it. But they don't think so. As I said, he didn't call for violence, and as far as I'm concerned, his right to say what he said is unassailable in any civilized country. Meanwhile, I also came across this clip from the demonstration, and I thought you might be interested in me sharing it with you. The chap who's talking, and I've already recorded him, but he has terrible diction, and I found some of what he said a bit difficult to understand. So assuming some of you might have the same problem, I've written it down so I can read it back. So every so often I'll be referring to my notes. He starts off by saying his name is David Huggard and he's a non-binary individual. Here, let me introduce you to him.
So, firstly, can I get your name on tape?
Yeah, my name is David Huggard. I'm a non-binary individual.
All right, so he said he's called David Huggard and he's a non-binary individual. And then the next bit he says is...
I also go by the persona of Eureka O'Hara.
He goes by the persona of Eureka O'Hara. Let's see. And apparently that's a character in some sort of a cable or TV show.
Which has been debuted on RuPaul's Drag Race, Season 9, 10, All-Star 6, and HBO's We're Here.
Right, I didn't get a lot of that, but I think he said something about RuPaul's Drag Race and some sort of war hero. As I said, his diction is poor. And I don't know whether I got that right. Maybe he has some oral damage, but I'm not going to go into that. I don't suppose many others would want to either. Okay. Now, let's see the next bit.
Okay, first name you go, can you spell that?
David, D-A-V-I-D-H-U-G-G-A-R-D. And then Eureka, E-U-R-E-K-A-O-H-A-R-A.
Amazing. So, firstly, why is it so important to be out here today?
Yeah, no, it's important to be out here today because we have to stand in solidarity with each other.
Right, so he spelt his name. Did you notice? Turns out he's not spelling fluid, is he? I wonder what he'd think if the interviewer had fluidly spelt his name like something else of his choice, like maybe Barney Rubble, perhaps. But whatever he's called, he says the following. Oh, yeah, it's important that we have to stand in solidarity with each other. Okay, so let's carry on. What's the next thing he says?
Obviously, Ashley Marie Preston is a great advocate and a huge sister of mine, also a trans woman. As a non-binary...
Right, he says... Ashley something Preston, again, I didn't get some of that, is a great advocate and a huge sister of mine. He must be huge if this chap thinks he's huge. And also a trans woman. Oh, sorry. She must be huge. One wonders just how huge. Okay, next.
Person. We as trans people and non-binary people aren't getting visibility or respect in the entertainment industry to begin with.
Right. We as trans people and non-binary people aren't getting visibility or respect in the entertainment industry to begin with. Look, I'd say that this person is extremely visible. It's not as if he's trying to blend into the background, is he, with pink hair and the rest of that outfit. I can't see much of it in the picture there, but it does appear to be somewhat unusual. And as for respect, look, if you're going to dress like that, then you have to expect some conspicuous stares, at the very least, from some people who might not have your sartorial tastes. And if you're going to dress like that, you should be prepared to accept that. I mean, goths know they're going to get looks, and they do it because they they don't mind getting the looks. All right,
And
next.
to have something like Dave Chappelle's special not be noted that it's promoting discrimination and hate conversation is very hurtful to the activism and the cause that we're trying to progress ourselves in the industry.
Right. It's actually quite difficult to know where to start with this. It's not even English. I'll read out what he says. And to have something like Dave Chappelle's special not be noted that it's promoting hate conversation is very hurtful to the activism and the cause that we're trying to progress ourselves in the industry. To have something like Dave Chappelle's special not be noted. I don't actually know where he's going with that, so let's try the next bit. It's promoting hate conversation. He's saying hate conversation here, which means he's not talking about hate speech, which might be considered criminal by some in this country anyway. No, he's talking about a couple of people, which is a conversation, discussing things with each other, in private or between themselves. That's what a conversation is. So what he's saying is that Chappelle's work is going to have an effect on people talking to each other. And he doesn't like what they might be talking about. First of all, people can have conversation. He might not find the conversation to his taste, but they are allowed to do that, whatever he thinks. That's the first thing. The second is that it's not promoting hate conversation if you're demonstrating in support of Dave Chappelle. The clue is in the name. And then he says it's very hurtful, as if you're not allowed to hurt people's feelings with what you say. You're just not allowed. And the next thing is, it's hurtful to the activism. What the dickens does that mean? Activism is an abstract word, and the cause we're trying to progress ourselves. That's not English again. The cause we're trying to progress ourselves. Okay. And the next thing is, in the industry. At last. 3 words together that actually fit into a comprehensive piece of language. Okay, let's have a look at the next bit. Where is it?
What do you think? I mean, like, there are counter-protesters here. I mean, like, what do you think of that?
The counter-protesters are disheartening, and it's sad to see that they are using the expression of laughing in the faces of people's pain and hurt and suffering.
Right, so he says here, the counter-protesters are indistinguishable, and it's sad to see that they're using the expression of laughing in the faces of people's pain and hurt and suffering. Oh dear. The counter-protesters are, as I said, indecipherable, and it's sad to see that they're using the expression of laughing. The expression of laughing, what's wrong with just saying laughing? On its own. What's the expression of laughing? Yeah, but when your mind isn't really working properly, then you're going to get stuff like that. If you mean they were laughing at you, well, what were they expected to do to a chap like you dressed up like Barney Rubble and telling them they can't have conversations, both of which are as ridiculous as each other? And then in the face of people's pain and hurt and suffering, look, his feelings might be hurt, but that's no reason to knock down Netflix's front door. It looks more like some people are whipping themselves up into pain and hurt and suffering. I'll tell you about pain and hurt and suffering. An Afghani athlete, a teenage volleyball player called Marjabin Hakimi, was beheaded by the Taliban at the beginning of October, and her family were instructed not to talk about it under pain of the same punishment. Now that's pain and hurt and suffering. What this person is talking about is nothing more than the spoilt complaints of an overripe first world sponge with nothing better to do. And now he talks about the counter demonstration. Let's see this bit.
And I don't think that they understand what they're doing.
And I don't think they understand what they're doing. I think they do. I think they do. They don't want you stopping them from having an opinion. That's what they understand. They don't want you stopping them from listening to Dave Chappelle simply because you don't like Dave Chappelle. And even like people like you, Mr. Huggard, are forcing people like those counter demonstrators to actually listen to that dreadful man. I think Dave Chappelle is a dreadful man, but I actually read the transcript of his comedy routine because of what you're doing. And a lot of people will be listening to that simply for the feeling of freedom from this prescriptive rubbish that people like you are pushing. Now, the next bit.
But they are promoting and causing hate conversation.
Right, they're promoting and causing hate conversation. That's all he can say. That's, the second time he said it? It's like his mind is going round in a loop. There's no proof that anything Chappelle says will cause those counter demonstrators to do anything. But this Huggard person is repeating the same assertions, and they're only assertions, again and again on a sort of loop, because he actually has no argument. Okay, next bit.
Also allowing people to think that it's okay to discriminate against those trans and non-binary individuals.
And also allowing people to think that it's okay to discriminate against us trans and non-binary individuals. So what he says here is that Chappelle's work is allowing people to think that it's okay to discriminate against trans and non-binary individuals. What? Where? As a matter of fact, Chappelle was at great pains in his set, probably in a doomed attempt to placate the trans activists, to take digs away from the trans people and shift them towards the ordinary people who feel uncomfortable in their presence. For instance, as I say, he says no American should have to show his birth certificate before going into a lavatory. And this Huggard person says that Chappelle said this gives people permission to, says that what Chappelle said gives people permission to discriminate. Or where does he say that? No, what happened here is that Huggard heard someone say that Chappelle had mentioned the word trans, and that was enough to send him off into a blue fit. Now let's get back to Mr. Huggard's opinions. Where's the next bit?
I was also misgendered.
Okay. Oh, he said he was also misgendered. Can you imagine the pain and hurt and suffering of that poor individual? Now, the problem with that is, I don't know whether he identifies as a man or as a woman. I have no idea. From the way he's dressed, he looks like a woman, but from his haircut, well, sort of like a man. So if I called him sir, he would be offended because he identifies as a woman. But if he happens to identify as what he is, a man who just happens to like dressing that way, and I called him madam or something like that, then he could be offended as well. You see, these people, I've noticed on the left, and these are, in that area, they believe they're mind readers. You see them doing it all the time on Twitter. So what you're saying is, you've heard that before, haven't you? And they believe that and because they think they can read people's minds, they just assume other people can read their minds. This is stupidity. I mean, the height of stupidity. It's a complete lack of empathy with anybody. It's a total self-absorption. Like babies, they assume the whole world revolves around them, and so it does until they're about 2 and they start learning things aren't quite that way. But such people as Mr. Huggard have hung on to that world revolving around me view. Okay. Anyway, the hurt and suffering he was going through. Where's my smelling salts? Look, I'll get on to the next bit before I faint. Here we are.
Disrespected by some of them, and it just shows that we are still working.
Right, disrespected by some of them. Well, as I said, he's disrespected like some of them. Look, if you're going to dye your hair pink and dress as Barney Rubble, then yes, you're going to get disrespect from some people who think you're ridiculous and probably mentally unstable as well. I mean, I don't think that, of course. I think you have the stability of a banker, but many wouldn't. And you've made yourself like this. You've made yourself like this. This wasn't something you were born with. Next bit is
On growth, and it's my duty as a person not of color and as a non-binary individual to stand by specifically.
Okay. And this shows that we're still working on growth, and it's my duty as a person not of colour and as non-binary individual. Okay, hang on here. I have to go back over this. And this shows that we're still working on growth. Well, that's for sure. It looks like he's working on quite a bit of growth, doesn't it? And then he says, it's my duty as a person not of colour. Look at that. He's managed to find a protected niche all for himself. He's a person not of colour. That's good. I'll have to try that one myself. And as a non-binary individual, I don't know, he calls himself an individual so many times, but I'm just wondering how many other individuals are stuck underneath that leather shirt of his. So anyway, he's a non-binary individual, and that's another protected niche, isn't it? Although I still don't have a clue what non-binary is. Right, next.
Non-binary individual to stand by specifically my trans brothers and sisters and everything in between of color.
So he says to stand by specifically my trans brothers and sisters and everything in between of colour. So assuming that Dave Chappelle is in the in-between category, between the two ends of trans, I suppose, and he's definitely of colour, that should include him too, surely. And let's see, we've got a couple more to finish off. What's this?
As a white person with privilege.
Okay, as a white person with privilege, because they need to know, so he's a white person with privilege. Perhaps that includes being able to elbow your way to the lunch counter before everyone else. I don't know. I don't know what privilege he has, but I know what privilege he claims, and it's a privilege I don't think he's earned. And finally, blissfully, the end.
So that there are people standing beside them when the people that are at the table in those powerful, responsible positions aren't showing that support.
All right. What does he say? There are people standing beside them when the people that are at the table in their group, powerful, responsible positions, aren't showing that support. Well, it's disjointed, but I think I got the point. Okay, he ends by saying that his brothers and sisters and everything in between of colour need to know that he's standing with them. I'd say that would be pretty difficult to miss when the people of power aren't showing that sort of support. And what I say is that when people are acting like overgrown babies, throwing their toys out of the pram and bawling their hurt and pain about someone making a joke, then they belong in the nursery, not blocking the car park outside Netflix offices. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Grannyopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.grannyopterics.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.